Hello and welcome to Paper of the Week. It's my turn to do it this week. Good. So we're going to be talking about a disease called Crohn's disease for the Paper of the Week. Now this is a journal that was published a couple of weeks ago, and the title of the journal is awesome, the front cover. Have a look at that. I love these journals. That's a guy, he's the publisher. He's not the guy who wrote the paper, he's the publisher. So these publishers are getting a little bit, I don't know what you call it, a little bit keen. And he's called the journal the World Journal of Gastroenterological Pharmacologicals and Therapeutics. Wow, big long word. Sorry about the big word, but there's more big words to come. And this is talking about Crohn's disease. Now, the reason why we did a paper on Crohn's disease is because we just did a podcast on ulcerative colitis, and both conditions have some sort of similarity. Now, the only difference is that Crohn's disease usually affects the rectum, the descending colon, transverse colon, and the ascending colon. So it can affect usually the distal end of the colon, which is the end, the rectum, or the whole of the large intestine. That's ulcerative colitis. Now, interestingly, Crohn's disease can also affect the colon, but it more commonly affects the ileum, which is the small intestine. But Crohn's disease can affect from the mouth all the way through to the anus, so it can interfere anyway. You can see you see people with endoscopes with ulcers down there, and that's Crohn's disease. Now, the problem with Crohn's disease is quite severe because Crohn's disease can affect the small intestine, which is where a lot of nutrients, proteins, fats, carbohydrates are absorbed. The large intestine is obviously important where it absorbs water, but most of your nutrients absorbed in the very part of the small intestine. So if you get that affected by Crohn's disease, these individuals often suffer severe malnutrition at times. So it's quite an interesting disease. Now, it was discovered in 1932 by a guy called, guess what, Dr. Crohn, and Gisberg and Oppenheimer are the other two doctors that were associated with it. So that's where you get the name Crohn's disease. They always name them after themselves. Now, the interesting thing about this paper is it looks at the updates with the medication specifically for Crohn's disease. And unfortunately, the medications for Crohn's disease are quite poor. There are drugs that they use for this, such as methotrexate, which suppress the immune system because this is an autoimmune disease. But really, they don't quite understand how this disease occurs. Now, with most diseases, there is a genetic predisposition. There's also certain factors that predispose people to this. Now, interestingly with Crohn's disease is that if you smoke, you maybe have a protective effect from Crohn's disease, which is weird. Now, I'm not suggesting you smoke, but that's what the stats say. Also, younger people typically tend to get Crohn's too, in 20s and 30s. It's quite common in those sort of areas as well. And also, we know diet and lifestyle have a huge fact to do with the gut. Now, all right, I'm a nutritionist, I'm going to be biased. I'm going to talk about diet first. All right, if you are suffering Crohn's disease, you really need to avoid things like wheat and dairy foods. These foods are typically not healthy for the human condition anyway, but for these sorts of, if you have Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, these foods really need to be eliminated. The second thing you need to do is regulate your immune system. So good old vitamin D is an extraordinarily beneficial supplement to normalize the immune system because Crohn's disease is an autoimmune disease. Now, what that means is the immune system attacks certain parts of the GI tract. Again, there's not an exact cause why. It's probably multifactorial. And we also know about Crohn's disease is that these people are usually malnourished. So this is where you need to saturate the inside of the guts with a good multivitamin like our multi-food, which is natural vitamins, obviously the best way to go. So good quality foods. You can also make sure you have a lot of collagen in there. But so there's lots and lots of things you can do to treat this sort of condition. Now, going into it a bit further and looking at the bit of difference here, when you look at people with Crohn's disease, there is a lot of protective factors. Now, one such protective factor is having a bug inside your gut called Helicobacter pylori. I know it's a big word, but it's called H. pylori, and it's the bug that's often associated with ulcers, in duodenal ulcers. Now, what people do when they find out they're positive for Helicobacter pylori is they eliminate it with a triple antibiotic or double antibiotic and a proton pump inhibitor, which basically kills the bug. Quite severe, powerful antibiotics. However, this bug is protective against ulcerative colitis. So, there's always a reason why something's in the gut. So if you've been detected with Helicobacter pylori, and let's face it, about 80% of the industrialized world are positive for Helicobacter pylori, if you're not exhibiting any symptoms, you may not need to treat it. You're starting to chase things around that may be actually beneficial. Now, if you have a duodenal ulcer, treat it, you know what I mean? But some people can live quite happily with Helicobacter pylori, and in fact it may serve as a protective role for them. So that's what these studies are finding. So very, very interesting, very, very beneficial role. So there is another drug called infliximab, which is a drug for ulcerative colitis, and it has very powerful side effects. So again, with that drug, it's quite a powerful immune and anti-inflammatory suppressant. So what we need to do first, if you know someone with ulcerative colitis, is first thing, get the diet right. Okay? Get the diet right. Get rid of the grains and the wheat and the dairy. Get rid of them. Not cut them down, not cut them back, not just try and do your best, not have cheat meals on Saturday. This is an immune-mediated thing. You need to eliminate them. It's that important. This is what we need to do. We need to settle that gut down. The second thing we need to do is look at things that you can do to up your vitamin D. Now, that can be obviously supplementing with vitamin D. It can be going out in the sun, getting moderate amount of sun, of course, not excessive. But also go to your doctor and have your vitamin D levels checked. That's good for lots of things, but it's particularly good for Crohn's disease. Thirdly, of course, once you look at natural medicine, you can look at stress, because that's got a lot to do with the gut, is you can start treating with things that help soothe the gut mucosa. So things like lots of turmeric. Now, don't take turmeric with black pepper, because you don't want to absorb the turmeric. You want to utilize the turmeric throughout the GI tract. So weirdly, it's just your good old cheap powdered turmeric. Get that in your food. Sure, you can supplement with great supplements like Gut Right or Resilience. They're brilliant for the gut. They really, really are. And that's what I would take. But also get the turmeric into your food. Eat gingers, those sorts of things. They're non-irritating. They're anti-inflammatories for the gut, and they'll work beautifully to help the gut. Now, if you need to go on a particular immune suppressant drug, please do it sparingly. Opt for as low a dose as you can get away with, because there are severe side effects. These are biologics, so in other words, they do change the course of the disease. But the best thing you can do with Crohn's disease is make sure you see a naturopath about getting the right treatment for you, because this is a potentially very, very severe disease. The literature is clear on this. It is tough to treat, but it's certainly treatable with oral herbs, a great diet, plenty of vitamin D, multivitamin, low reactive diet, and reducing your stress. All right, well, that's paper of the week on Crohn's disease, and thank you for listening.